ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train, episode number 307. I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. This week, of course, we are looking at myself constructing some little stuff in downtown Mason Valley. Some suburban blocks. Nothing really special, but it has to be done, of course. And we have a question from East Rail 11 on episode 244 about the Disney engines, which actually he asks, Ellis, did you ever use the Disney steam engines? And then he put an edit in. I'm not sure when he put the edit in, but he goes, never mind, I think they run 3 foot. And he's right, they do in fact run 3 foot. Although, interesting story about Disney, because it became a stronghold of Central Florida for at least a time, I know that much, until they ended up getting overwhelmed by zombies that were coming out of Orlando, because Orlando's kind of a big place. I never considered using the Disney engines for anything. We had enough 3-foot engines for all of the purposes that we could have possibly needed 3-foot gauge engines for, which really were not many purposes at all. But, you know, I did know that they existed. You know, a couple of times they were brought up, and it was like, oh, what about, you know, hey, they've got the 3-foot gauge engines at Disney, and my response would sort of be, yeah, like, what about them? So what? They have the 3-foot gauge engines at Disney. They've got the steam engines at Disney. What would we possibly do about them? What would we possibly do with them? They're, I mean, not to say, but they're frankly kind of anemic compared to a lot of the other 3-foot gauge engines that we could get our hands on. You know, between White Pass engines and all of just the Denver and Rio Grande stuff, which, you know, that stuff is pretty hefty. We didn't need to pull out these park engines for the sake of running trains. I mean, they were in good shape, I'll give it that much. You know, I'll say that much. But they weren't like, ooh, we've got to go grab those because, you know, whatever, they're useful to us. They weren't. And that extends to virtually all park engines, because, well, most parks don't run standard gauge. So it was sort of like okay, we've got these things that are steam engines, but they're honestly kind of worthless to us. And I mean, that's a pretty high bar, I guess, for something to be useless to the Zombie Train Incorporated back in the day, because we were real short for power. And yeah, ideas were floated about converting 3-foot gauge engines to standard gauge, but none of the park engines for sure. Again, they just weren't strong enough. They weren't good candidates. Of course, the top candidates were like the K-37s, because they were standard gauge engines back in the day. But the whole thing with park engines, no, it just wasn't there. You know, we just couldn't justify it. We weren't scrounging for that much small power. And Disneyland, I think, was effectively worthless. You know, I wasn't gonna get the Zombie Train over there. Not saying that it was a dangerous place, because it really wasn't. It was in California. It was one of the areas that the military got to fairly quickly, but they didn't care about Disneyland at all. You know, it didn't exactly have a major strategic advantage of capturing Disney. In Florida, it's a different story. When Disney World sort of came up for grabs, you know, it had a period of inhabitants at the beginning of the war, and then that sort of dwindled as far as I know. You know, the park is defensible, but it's not, I don't know, it was, if I understand correctly, there were difficulties regarding sort of dealing with the subterranean nature of a lot of Disney. You know, Disney World is like built on a plateau, a man-made plateau, and it's got all these tunnels running underneath it, which make it really cool from a defense point of view. But once you're sharing the space with your enemy, which eventually they were sharing it with zombies, then it became a nightmare to purge it. And that came up again when, you know, the military was trying to take it over. Now, that was very late in the war for the continental United States. So we didn't really help a lot for that. I don't know much about that operation. You know, a lot of these earlier or mid operations I had a pretty good hand in. I had, the Zombie Train Incorporated did a lot for, moving troops and supplies and coordinating and everything like that, because really the military didn't have any other option. But by the time we came around to trying to conquer Orlando, and take back Florida, which, I don't understand why that was necessary, but by the time we got to doing that, the military was pretty capable on their own. We did move some troops, but it was just more of like a, hey, can you do us a favor, or, can you take these, few thousand guys and move them from where they're stationed over here, and just drop them off outside of Orlando, and maybe keep a train station just in case. And that was really it, We were playing logistics a little bit, but we were not in any way the masterminds or a real major key of their operation for Disney. Orlando, we had a little bit more of a hand in, but still, it wasn't our brainchild at all. It was solely the military had a plan, and we happened to factor into that plan and the fact that we were helpful. Now, I say that, you might expect that during the Zombie Train Incorporated's sort of heyday, when the military was expanding, we were really just a logistical organization, but because we needed so much to keep going between railroad centers and mines and steel mills and quarries and all sorts of other factory buildings and things like that, the fact that we needed so much meant that we had to effectively be our own military. And so a lot of these operations were things that we needed, or things that we thought we needed, that we had convinced the military to lend us manpower and weapons for. Naturally, because of the nature of the Zombie Train Incorporated, that's just the way it was. We exchanged our expertise and our manpower and our locomotives and whatever to the military for them giving us arms and people and stuff like that. That was the trade we had going on, and I've talked about that at length. But if you look at a lot of these operations, especially the mid-operations, once the Zombie Train Incorporated really got going and we realized, okay, we need to set out a list of things that we think we need, of locations that we think we need, it's very clear that, we are going to be needing to stage operations way ahead of the military's sort of slow-marching barrier, where they were going city by city, town by town, advancing their line, sort of snaking, okay, take this town in the north, and then the middle, and then the south, and then the south, and the middle, and the north. And, they would just shuffle regiments up and down the country, sort of inching their line forward, sort of like you're building a tunnel under a river, But then we'd need, we need this city in Arkansas, for example, or, Illinois. And we need to take over that area. And that's like hundreds of miles ahead of where the military has gotten. And it's like, we're not going to wait on that. Let's just ask for some manpower and some weapons and some ammo and get in there and see if we can do it ourselves. So a lot of these operations were really our doing. And then, the tide sort of shifted. Whereas towards the end, we had all the things that we needed. And the military was, of course, trying to mop up all the population centers. So we were providing logistical cover and stuff like that. Just doing all this stuff in the background for them. We were covering their butts by getting them materials and men and whatever. But just by getting them to the place, not, working them up for them. So, it was not, it wasn't rocket science to do that. But it was useful to them. It was a good thing to be able to do, and it was really, our secondary purpose of being, Because before then, it was, okay, we need to have an economy, and we also need to have a nation. So the economy was our job. That was the stated goal. But also because of the fact that we had all this motive power and stuff, we were obviously useful for logistics. We didn't really do a lot of production for the military, though. We didn't make very much for them. You know, they very easily could have asked us to make them steel for vehicles, or to even build them vehicles or something like that. They never really came to us for that. You know, a lot of the time we built our locomotives and our rolling stock when we needed additional rolling stock, and locomotives, I suppose. But I've covered the locomotives before, that's why I had to call out rolling stock specifically. They really made everything that they needed. Which, you know, sometimes led to some issues because there are only so many places where you can get materials, you know, iron ore and stuff like that, and we did a really good job of trying to put that together for ourselves. And the military's going, well, hey, we really need some of that too. And we're going, well, you know, what do you want? You know, we can work something out, but, you know, we were trying to cover our own butts and sort of put our priorities where they belong for us, you know. The other thing was, and this is something I didn't really consider, right, but the military, the Navy specifically, and by extension the United States, because that's really the effective government during the war, as I've brought up many times before, they were running an almost fully nuclear fleet. They had... Obviously, we only had, and only have, nuclear aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. So all of their other surface ships were either mothballed awaiting fuel, or burning the reserves of fuel that they had, which really wasn't a whole lot. And you know, that led them to some issues. But by and large, they didn't really get through. They had pretty significant stores that they would not share. But they were running short when we started to get facilities back online to refine oil. But that was sort of the reason why they were really pushing us to do it. Would have been nice if they'd actually helped us with that. But the issue with that is we were going east from the East Coast to get expertise, I suppose. And all of their ships, literally all of their equipment that was useful to them, was in the Pacific. It was either in San Francisco or in Los Angeles or thereabouts, you know. It was on the Pacific coast of the United States, and I think some things were out by Hawaii, but I'm not certain about that. Either way, the whole nuclear fleet had been brought over there. But we were running a nuclear fleet, and as the war sort of went on, there were a number of ships that they sort of reached the end of their rope, you know, particularly the Enterprise, their Enterprise, the carrier, was already, like, getting towards the end of its life when World War Z began, and they kept that thing running and afloat, but it needed a refueling, and so I remember this very brief sort of uranium rush, where I was like, oh crap, we need to refuel all these ships. It wasn't like a go mine and refine uranium, it was like, there are stockpiles here, here, and here, you need to go pick up uranium and bring it across the country to us here in the Pacific. Absolute nightmare of an operation, because we didn't have the right kind of cars for that. We didn't want to use the wrong kind of cars and risk a derailment, and like, you know, you don't want to have a nuclear incident on top of the current, you know, apocalypse. It still almost feels weird to call it zombies, because, and this is just an aside, but you know, before the war, people figured, yeah, zombies, haha, you know, they're you know, you see them in books and movies and whatever. They're not real, idiot. And then suddenly they were everywhere, and here we are at the end of the war, and I'm hesitant to call them zombies because it still feels like zombies don't exist. It's like, it'd be like if we were invaded by vampires or something. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week. It's It's the little bits of humor that keep you sane, you know? Train Man out.